And so welcome everybody. We missed you last week for Thanksgiving, but we hope that you had a good holiday. And we're admitting people right now. And Marissa is trying to join us, and sometimes she has issues with her internet. But we're going to be talking today about the programs at Mediation and Restorative Justice. And we have several people with us from there. We have Marissa Cornell, Mackenzie Laney, Ashley Worth, and maybe one other person. Mackenzie, do you know?
Molly's joining us.
Okay. There's Marissa. Yay. Fantastic. So, and I'm recording this session so that we can post it later. So what we'd like to hear about is, y'all have several programs that you operate there. So a little bit about the programs that you're currently doing. And then what we've asked everyone to do is to talk about how you see trauma in the people that you work with and how you help them build resiliency, and then how you promote wellness in yourself. So we'll start first. There's four of y'all: Marissa, Mackenzie, Ashley, and who's the other one?
Molly.
Molly. When it gets more than like one or two, my brain starts not functioning as well. So I'm going to do my best. So if y'all could just introduce yourselves, and then we'll go back around and kind of tell more about the programs that y'all are doing.
Sure. My name is Marissa Cornell. I'm the Executive Director of the Mediation and Restorative Justice Center. Maybe y'all want to introduce yourselves first?
So my name is Molly Miller-Shrinkin, and I'm the Program Coordinator for the Watauga Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program and the Recovery on the Inside program beneath MRJC.
And my name is Mackenzie Laney, and I'm a Watauga County Coordinator for our Sentencing Circles program for MRJC.
And Ashley.
Having problems unmuting. I'm Ashley Worth. I'm the Outreach and Support Specialist for the Recovery on the Inside and lead programs for Watauga County.
And at least one, if not several of those programs are new. So we're looking forward to hearing more about them and how we get people involved with them. So I guess, Marissa, if you don't mind, we'll ask you to kind of start with the more well-established or the programs that have been running longer, and just give us a little idea about what Mediation and Restorative Justice Center does.
Sure. So the Mediation and Restorative Justice Center is 27 years old, and it started out as the Blue Ridge Dispute Settlement Center, so it was very mediation focused. And I've been with the center for 12 years, and I would say in the last 3 or 4 years, kind of alongside the work of WCCI, we have really shifted our focus to a broader approach of restorative justice, and taking a look at how our programs fit with that model, and also how the trauma-informed efforts connect to what we're doing. And so along with that, we've added some new programs. I think the state and our community in particular, thanks to the work of WCCI, have been more open to restorative programs. And so we've been able to add some new programs, and also really connect what we've been doing to those new ways of looking at things. So the programs that we have, and I'll pass this off to the folks that are more the direct service providers. We have always had adult to district court mediation. So misdemeanor cases that are interpersonal disputes can be referred to us. For resolution, that's considered an out-of-court resolution. The charge gets dismissed and there's an agreement reached. We also have juvenile mediation, which is for at-risk youth. It's funded by the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council. And our newest program in juvenile mediation is Sentencing Circles, which is sort of a model of teen court. Mackenzie's going to talk more about that. But it was sought out by juvenile justice because the state wanted all 100 counties in North Carolina to have access to a teen court-like program. And so Sentencing Circles is what we came up for this area, and we have it in all 5 counties in the district. We also have a law enforcement assisted diversion program that Molly and Ashley will talk about, recovery on the inside. And we have drug treatment courts in 5 counties as well. And I'm the Watauga Drug Treatment Court Coordinator. So that is a post-sentencing program where it's kind of alternative sentencing, where it's an intensive probationary program where people go to treatment, they're on probation. We have an actual court session where people go in front of the judge frequently. So there's a lot of accountability. And so with all of those things, our purpose is that we know that the traditional systems that we work in tend to traumatize or re-traumatize people. And so we are trying to provide alternatives to healing the harm that's done, whether it's the harm that surrounds substance use or the harm that comes after trauma. We know that hurt people. That's just a thing that happens. And so how do we interrupt that cycle and meet people's needs and meet them where they are? And so whether it's conflict resolution for a specific dispute, or it's a restorative circle where we have the community support a young person who's made a bad decision, or any of our diversionary services, we're really trying to interrupt that cycle that people get stuck in. So I will pass that off to any of the other ones of you all that would like to talk about the specific programs, and we're happy to take questions along the way as well.
Thank you for bringing that up, Marissa. I usually say at the start and did not, but you are welcome to type a comment or a question in the chat box at any time. And then we'll give a few minutes towards the end if people are not writing comments in the chat box. And just one more time, if you also would put your name in the chat box, just so we have a record of attendance. So you don't have to wait on us to call on you. If you have a question as we're going along, we're keeping it on the chat so you can put it there. Okay, so who wants to take over from there?
I kind of thought about this in my head, and I'm not trying to just put you on the spot, Mackenzie, but I kind of felt like since you work with like younger folks, maybe we could.
Yeah, I can go. I'm ready. Okay. So I work with the Sentencing Circles program, and that got started at the beginning of this year, and it's funded by the JCPC. And Sentencing Circles is a restorative approach to a teen court. So it operates through like the circles basis. So we come together like in a circle with volunteers. So I will kind of describe who makes up that circle, and then I can describe the process of the sentencing circle. So it's made up by a facilitator who would be an MRJC staff member, the juvenile who has committed an offense or has a behavioral complaint, whatever has brought them to the sentencing circle, their support people, often their parents or their guardians. If there's a victim of the offense or the behavioral complaint, they're invited to the circle, and they're also invited to bring their own support people, any other affected parties. In the couple circles that we've had so far, like if there's a arresting law enforcement officer, we've had one come to a circle. And then there's going to be at least 2 adult community volunteers. So those are trained volunteers from the community that are representing how that offense harmed the community and how the community can support the juvenile, and then 2 peer community volunteers that are going to be either around the same age or a little bit older than the juvenile. So that's who makes up the circle. And something like really important about a circle is that everyone has equal voice, and all of the decisions are consensus based. And so when a referral is made to sentencing circles, it can come from juvenile justice, it can come from SROs, law enforcement, the school, the community, but they refer a juvenile to the program. We start with, like, of course, intake and going over it, some of the basics with the juvenile and preparing them for the circle. But when they come to the circle process, which is like an hour and a half, it's a facilitated process where we decide who was harmed, how they were harmed, and how the juvenile can repair those harms. And that can be harms to the juvenile themselves, to the community, to their parents, whoever they've harmed. So it wants to help the juvenile understand how their actions impact others in the community, and also give them an opportunity to make things right rather than simply punishing them. So the sentencing circle produces a sentence, but we call it a plan of action that's signed with agreed upon terms from the circle. And that might include personalized community service, apologies, research papers, helping their parents around the house can be on that. And after the juvenile completes that, they have a certain period of time, and then they come back for a celebration circle, and they are successfully diverted out of the traditional justice system.
And so listening to you talk, Mackenzie, makes me realize that some people, restorative justice was kind of a foreign concept to me till about a year ago. And so Mackenzie or Marissa, for people who don't even know what restorative justice is, can you talk a little bit about how it's different from our traditional punitive, negative punishment system that we most typically are familiar with?
Sure. Restorative justice asks different questions than the traditional justice system does. So the traditional justice system wants to know what law was broken, who broke the law, and what punishment do they deserve. That's kind of what the court system would ask. And so restorative justice wants to know what harm was done and what the needs are of the people that are involved in that harm, whether they're the victim or they are a support person or the young person. And so the sentencing circle or the mediation, the purpose of that is to figure out how the harm can be repaired, not to issue punishment. Because a lot of times when you have a punishment in a court system, I was just on a presentation earlier this morning with Michelle Miller, and we were talking about how if a young person goes in front of a judge, their back is to the victim. They are more accountable to the court system than they are to the victim. And in restorative processes, we want everyone's needs to be met, and the victim gets a true voice where they don't necessarily in the court system. So the restorative approach is ask different questions, ask what happened and how to fix it rather than who did it and what the punishment should be. And I think that as we've gone through this process of becoming trauma informed, we've realized that what makes it restorative justice restorative is when it's trauma informed, is that's how it's restorative, because there's lots of justice processes that aren't restorative.
And so I imagine that you get this question, but as I'm listening to you talk, I'm hearing the devil's advocate, the people that I've talked to in the past. What do you say to people when they ask you about, the concepts and themes like retribution and accountability? And I just know that our traditional justice system has been one of punishment. And so how do you respond when people say that the perpetrator is not getting what they deserve because they're not being punished enough?
Yeah, Molly and Ashley may want to speak to this because we've launched these new programs, and I would say the majority of the community has really been open to it, but there have been some folks that have questions, whether it's the right way. And some people really respond to data, and the data shows that this does create behavioral change, which is what we're really after. We want people to not harm anymore. We don't want to beat them down so that they continue harming and feeling bad. We want them to build resiliency in them so that they make different decisions. But I think there's one strategy to share data with people, but not everybody responds to that. And so maybe sharing our stories about success stories are always really effective. Mackenzie and Ashley, any of you all, do you have any thoughts about that? I know we've all encountered naysayers. I don't even see Molly anymore.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, so that's definitely, or in my experience, that has been one of the biggest misconceptions that we've had to deal with or confront. And like Marissa said, like we can choose to respond in a lot of different ways. Some people are more data minded, where we can see like that people who engage in restorative processes, like that they're less likely to go on and commit further crimes. So that works. And for some people, and the stories, and then just time, I think, has been a big part of it. Like a couple years ago when we started doing this type of work, and it seemed more like radical in a way, that there was a lot of skepticism. But as we've continued to build relationships, continued to have successes, continued to evolve, because we've I don't want to say we've made mistakes, but that we've started just pick somewhere to start, and we've had to evolve and pivot and see what works and what doesn't work. And we're showing that we're truly invested in solving the problem. And I think people recognize that and get on board. I've definitely had people come back and say, I thought this whole thing was crazy, but I'm on your side now, which is exciting.
And you may come back to this at some point, Molly. I don't mean to jump ahead, but the whole time y'all have been answering my question, I've been thinking about the project you did where you were interviewing repeat visitors to the jail and how much trauma they come from. And so what Marissa said about hurt people, it's not like we're taking people in a vacuum who are committing crimes and harming others. Harm was done to them as well. And so one thing that I really like about this whole process is that it's about redemption and resiliency and strength and learning compassion where you may not have been shown compassion. So I was just curious about, we get that in school sometime too. When we're talking about compassion at schools, is that one thing people do things wrong, they need to be punished so they learn their lesson. So I'm always open to hearing what the response to that is. So
yeah. And I think another big part of that is like recognizing the power of the disease of addiction. Like when you're in active addiction, it doesn't matter what the consequences are. It doesn't matter what you're about to lose, that you're going to continue to do the same things until you find a way to do something different. So for a lot of our people, like Marissa says, our folks can do prison time standing on their head. It's not something that, serves as a deterrent to necessarily stop behavior. And we've seen that time and time again. So you eventually just have to say like, okay, what can actually solve this problem? What opportunities have this person not been given, or what can we try again? Because I think if we're really, and I think at least the law enforcement in our community can get behind the idea of if we really value community safety and stopping crime and protecting people, that we need to do what we can to prevent this from happening. And when we see it continue over and over and over again, we know that something is not working. So let's try and do something differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. Ashley, you were going to say something.
Oh, yeah. So Molly and I were actually kind of talking about this yesterday with a comment that was made to me about a client and that has repeatedly been made to me about this person. And I think that there becomes this like weird gray area where people think that because we're acting with compassion or like talking to people with this level of compassion and empathy that we're against accountability. And that's not the goal. Like our goal is not to like keep people from getting in trouble or not being held accountable for their actions. The goal is to like come up with other ways of holding people accountable. So we know that like traditional justice measures don't always, every once in a while somebody gets arrested and winds up in the jail and decides they're going to change their life forever. But we also know that things like trauma and substance use completely hijack your brain, right? So, I mean, it literally changes your brain's chemistry. And if we don't give people opportunities to like find rehabilitative methods instead of like punitive ones, then really we're just perpetuating that cycle.
Yeah, thanks, Shell. I completely got us. I just completely hijacked the whole thing. So sorry. All right. So Mackenzie, that was sentencing circles. And then who wants to go next?
Let's do it like, let's do lead first, because it kind of moves through that progression. Do you want to talk about lead, Ashley, and I'll do recovery on the inside? We can jump back and forth.
Yeah, so LEAD, for those of you who don't know, LEAD stands for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. We're kind of modeled after, or not kind of, we're modeled after other programs that are working in other parts of the state. Originally, the initiative started out in Seattle. LEAD is essentially a pre-booking diversion, so it gives officers an alternative to taking low-level misdemeanor offenders to jail for their first offense, or not necessarily even their first offense. But nonviolent crimes are kind of the nonviolent or victimless crimes, such as like misdemeanor drug possession, misdemeanor paraphernalia, I think shoplifting, those kinds of things. It kind of recognizes that people who are committing these crimes are already in a place of sort of instability in their lives. And so just going with the traditional method of taking this person to jail could just completely uproot any stability that they have at that time. There's also a social referral component, which is more what we're operating on. COVID-19 has definitely changed and shifted the way that we had planned on rolling this program out earlier in the year. The social referral is, basically somebody, if you notice somebody that you're providing services to, or that you come into contact with, that you feel like there is a risk of criminal involvement and there's definitely an underlying substance use or mental health disorder, then you could refer them to LEAD, and we provide case management, peer support, connection to services within the community. We kind of serve as like I'd like to call it like the connecting tissue, right? So like we know that a lot of the things that we do in a lot of the areas that we work in kind of exist in these silos, that people aren't necessarily talking to each other, and not everybody knows what other organizations can offer. And so it's kind of like our job to be able to say, oh yeah, like I heard that you can get this need filled at the Health and Hunger Coalition, so maybe we can connect you to services there. Or, I've heard the Children's Council has this going on for new parents. And more than anything, I think the support piece is huge. We have people that we might be the only people they know that don't use drugs. We might be the only people that they feel that they can reach out to in a time of need. They may not have traditional networks of support, or those networks of support are just unhealthy. We've noticed a lot of like generational substance use, a lot of things that exist in the family system. And so, traditionally people think that you should be able to go to your parent or child even for support, and those things aren't necessarily true for everybody that we come into contact with.
Makes sense. I appreciate the way y'all were doing this kind of in a chronological way, because when Marissa was saying all these things, it was swirling around in my head. So the way you're doing sentencing circles and LEAD, now recovery on the inside, helps me kind of make sense of it in my brain. So thanks for the way that you're putting it in order for us. And then Molly, you're going to talk about recovery on the inside.
So recovery on the inside started in 2018 when I was a BSW student at App, and Denise brought up the research study. That's kind of how all of it started. The sheriff's office, they wanted somebody to come in and do something about recidivism, and that was really like the only guidance that I received from the beginning. So I wanted to first talk to these people and get to know them and try to figure out like what is really at the root of what's going on and why people in Watauga County cycle in and out of incarceration. And there's some like obvious things there. We looked at like previous criminal records. Substance use is a big one, but I also wanted to look at things that, like Marissa said, like we tried to ask the questions, that this population isn't used to being asked. So we asked about trauma, we asked about social and emotional support, housing. It was a huge thing. And I did that, one, because I wanted to be able to show like what was really going on. And two, like I'll disclose, like I'm a person in recovery, and I knew like a lot of the things that were going on, or had hints about them, but wanted to be able to like present it in a way that wasn't opinion based, that we could really look at this population and see like, this is what's actually going on or what's causing this. So out of that research, we found that the 4 biggest commonalities among offenders who cycled in and out was high levels of childhood trauma, unstable housing, mental health, poor mental health, and substance use. And so I interviewed 50 people, and everyone that I interviewed with, we did my best to come up with a release plan or give resources or get people to the next step. And that's kind of where recovery on the inside started. So what we do is we work with people who are staying in jail, usually because they can't afford to post bond or get out. We work with their stakeholders. So that could be family. It's usually probation or parole officers, attorneys. And as Ashley said, we kind of serve as that like tissue piece to try to fill in these gaps. And we communicate back and forth. We help people fill out applications. Lead and recovery on the inside work from a more harm reduction standpoint, where we don't tell people what to do. We don't give advice unless they ask for it. It's very client-centered, client-led. If somebody wants to go to a full-blown 2-year inpatient treatment program, we pull out all the stops to make that happen. If somebody just wants Narcan at release, we try to make that happen, or they maybe want to use a little more safely, we can point people in the direction of clean needles, or just a food box. We have clients with lead who are still outside camping right now. So we're able to, go and do check-ins with them and make sure that they have a warm meal that day, or buy propane for their heat. We're really varied in how we can be helpful. We don't have a lot of the same, and I'm jumping more over to lead now, but we don't have a lot of the same accountability measures that a lot of programs do, like drug testing. We don't require people to meet with us a certain number of times, because we know within this population that the majority of people that you come into contact with are not treatment ready, and that's okay. It's more important to us that we know, or that they know that when they do become treatment ready, or they do want to do something different, that they know where to fall back on. They know where they're not going to be judged. They know where they can receive help. So then after somebody leaves the recovery on the inside program, then lead picks back up and we can help that person once they're out.
Yeah, and I think it's so like lead operates in this like harm reduction framework of meeting people where they are, and like Molly and I take that quite literally. So if where you are is the Walmart parking lot, we'll be there. If where you are is a campsite, we'll be there. Like we will actually literally meet you where you're at, as opposed to like expecting you to operate within within the 9 to 5 traditional business hours that a lot of agencies operate under. And that's been one thing that like I've had clients who will like text me on a Sunday and be like, oh, I really need a ride tomorrow morning to do this, that, or the other. And I'm like, okay. And then when I respond, they're like, oh, wait, like I can talk to you on the weekends, and like you can talk to me anytime. I'm in bed before 10, but like if you want to send a message, I'll reply in the morning. So it's really cool to see that like they can access support in a way that normally they wouldn't be able to. And also like that the chaos of active addiction is just that. It's absolute chaos. And so like people will go into crisis at times other than, traditional business hours, or whenever their group and IOP is, or when their therapist is available. And so being able to kind of like field that and offer any kind of emotional support is like a huge piece of the whole thing.
And for people who maybe don't understand how big that component is of meeting people where they are, I've always been amazed that we expect some of the people who are struggling the most with physical and mental health to find a way to an office, be there at their appointment time, remember when that is, and then that if they do that wrong 3 times, then they can't get services anymore. And so to be able to eliminate some of those barriers of how do I get there, when is it, it's Tuesday at 2, but this is Friday at 7, and I'm having a problem now, and it can't wait till Tuesday at 2. And so that really resonates with me. I was with a client the other day. I was sitting with her while she was waiting for her medication appointment, and it was supposed to be at 2:30. And so it was we were there, and it was 2:29, 2:30, the 2:31, 2:32. And I ended up calling and saying, is the person coming? Because I have the resources to do that. And they were like, oh, wait a minute, let us check. Okay, yes, we just remind blah, blah, blah. She finally gets there about 2:36. And while we're waiting, the person says to me, I don't think they realize they're working with people with mental illness. Like, I'm lucky to be here at 2:29, and I've been sitting here till 2:36. And so I just thought that was a really good insight into how difficult it is for them to get where they need to be, but how service providers kind of have this free, we get to come and go when we need to and show up when we can and that kind of thing, but they get services taken away from them if they don't comply 100% like we expect them to. So
yeah, and I also think it's important to note that there are like multiple barriers within that exist. Like we currently have a client who has DSS involvement, criminal justice involvement. She's interacting with all these different areas and doesn't have a driver's license, right? So she gets caught in this cycle of like driving without a license, and then she has to go to court for that, and then she can't go to court for that because she doesn't have a way to get there, and so then she gets a warrant for a failure to appear and is still expected to operate within the system and do all of the things that are required of her. And for child safety, like she understands and I understand, and I think everybody here understands that like we have to ask you to be here, right? But at the same time, it's like, I can't get here if I don't have transportation. Yeah. And then within the chaos of active use, I've noticed with a lot of our clients that like future orientation is not there. Like I have no idea, like if I'm going to be warm enough tonight in my tent. I can't think about like what I need to do next Wednesday. Or, right now my most immediate need is, finding a ride to Walmart to get groceries. Like I can't be worrying about what's going on after the weekend. Like I'm hungry. Yeah. And being able to be that place for those people, and the meet people where they are, like that's been a huge piece of it for me. I'm also a person in recovery and was once like a high service utilizer, which a lot of people would know better as a frequent flyer. I frequented my county jail. I interfaced with all of those systems as well. And so, having that understanding of like, it's not one thing, it's a million things. And so on some days when you're living that life, like just your shoe being untied is enough to send you off the deep end completely.
Yeah. So we've kind of moved into one of the things I wanted us to talk about, which is how y'all see people from trauma. I think there's this really strong yearning to know what that looks like, and how we keep talking about it's not boxes, disheveled, dirty clothes, homeless, that kind of thing. But so if y'all could talk some about how you see the people in your program from trauma and kind of what that looks like for you. Let's see, Marissa, you haven't talked in a while. You want to start?
Yeah, I can say a little bit about drug treatment court, which is on the kind of other end of the spectrum. So we are looking for opportunities for earlier intervention, which is what LEAD is. And when an officer encounters any of these folks, one example of drug treatment court is for people who are further along in the criminal justice system. So they're facing felonies. They probably have been in court multiple times before. But if an officer encounters someone who's in active addiction and they don't have possession of a substance, they just have paraphernalia, it's a misdemeanor. So if someone has needles in their pocket, it's a misdemeanor, but that doesn't speak to the scope of their needs, because if they're using needles, then they need, supportive services, but there's only so much you can do with a misdemeanor. So LEAD can connect someone to the services they need sooner. Drug court requires people to participate in those services because they are further along. I would say that probably 90 to 100% of our clients have experienced childhood trauma, have at least one ACE on their ACE score. I think, Molly, your research was that average was like 4 on the folks that you studied, but it was 6. Okay, sorry. That's my fax machine. So I think that people who are the justice system traumatizes people too. So if they didn't have childhood trauma, they've probably experienced some trauma along the way. And so it's more than we ever expected. And almost everybody that I work with has a history of trauma, some really terrible trauma that they've never talked to anybody about. And they've just been stuck in this cycle of making bad decisions and, using substances and fighting and whatever it is that gets them tangled up, and they've never really gone to the place where they can talk about why they've ended up in this situation. And so we try to help people go there when they're ready to. For the drug treatment court has more leverage with the justice system because there's a threat of long-term incarceration usually for folks that are in my program.
Okay. And Mackenzie, in our WCCI, no, it's not the WCCI presentation, but Florida did a study, Florida State University, and I think something like 98% of kids involved in the juvenile justice system come from childhood trauma. And so those are the kind of numbers that you see. And what does that look like in some of the youth that you work with?
So I think that, I know that is probably true. And so far we've only had a couple referrals because we got it just started this year. And I think it was a little bit interesting to note that when kids weren't in school, we weren't getting referrals. Kids weren't being charged. It seemed like that was what was happening. So now that we've just kind of started getting some referrals, I think I do see that. And because it's an interesting way to look at juvenile justice or working with juveniles, because there's so many different aspects that we're going to look at in the circle, aside from just what happened, what's the incident that led you to this. We talk about what are the juveniles' needs and what were they thinking at the time that they did this, and how have their parents or their guardians supported them or reacted to this, and do they need more support people in their lives. So I think that you get a bigger scope of the juvenile there. And then one thing that I just kind of always think of when we're doing this is the thought of the positive supportive adult in their lives, and whether or not these juveniles have that, and whether or not sentencing circles can provide that for them.
That's a good point. We hear all the time talking WCCIs about something to offset trauma is a relationship with a positive, consistent, caring adult. And if you've had those, sometimes it's hard to comprehend that someone can live a life with not a single one of those present. So that's a good point. Ashley or Molly, y'all talked about being homeless and repeat jail stays and not having transportation. Are there some other common things that you see with people who have experienced trauma?
I have a friend that's in federal prison, and he had called me the other night, and we were talking about like trauma and like what happens in your childhood and how that plays out across like your lifespan, and how like people tend to think that, how they grew up is like normal if they're never exposed to anything else. And, he and I were talking about our own experiences. And then I started thinking about like clients, and when they talk to me about like their upbringing, I think from all of the intakes, I was actually looking at this earlier, all of the like intake assessments that we've done for our lead clients, every single one of them had at least 4 ACEs. I think 4 was the lowest number. And each of them, when they've talked about it, it's kind of like, well, that's just what you do. That was normal. Like they grew up in households where if you misbehaved, like your parent was violent towards you. You drank, you used, like selling drugs was normalized to a lot of these people. And so I think when we like take a step back and think about each of these people as like children who, like, if you had a child in the dark, even today, raise them in a house that never had lights on, that would be what was normal to them if they were never exposed to anything else in the world. So we have these people who had never been exposed to anything else or didn't realize there was any kind of alternative path, and maybe knew that the things that had hurt them were wrong, but didn't know or identify with anybody else or felt like they were the only one. And Molly and I were actually kind of texting about this morning, like my own experience of coming into like 12-step recovery and going into like Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and thinking like, oh, finally, finally, I know I'm not the only one. I'm not alone. And what made that experience so profound for me was identifying with other people who had been through similar things and just having that sense of community and being in relationship with people. And I think that for our clients, like once Molly and I kind of disclose our own history, or when we approach somebody with like the ACEs questionnaire and say, I know that these questions are difficult. And I also know that like my score is this, so anything that you say here, like, I'm not going to judge you, and you're not alone in what happened to you. And people start to like open up about that.
Yeah. Molly, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that was perfect.
So let's talk about how you promote your own wellness, because while it's great that you're answering texts at Sunday at 7, which I have occasionally been known to do as well, you also have to think about boundaries and keeping yourself well and those kinds of things. So, and working with people from trauma is incredibly difficult, because then you start talking about secondary trauma and burnout and things like that. So I'm going to ask each one of you to kind of share how you promote wellness in yourself and kind of maintain your own boundaries and take care of yourself. So Marissa, I'll start with you.
It's hard, of course. I like to spend time with my family. We've had a lot of togetherness here recently, maybe too much, but I'm also, I think knowing what your love languages are, either for yourself or, because mine is that I'd like to give gifts and I like to make things for people. So I like to go foraging and collect natural, medicinal plants and make stuff. And so it's something completely different, but it's still in that helping, it feels good to me because it's still that helping, but it's not the work side of helping. And so it decenters me from the work without completely exiting it, because that I have a hard time with that. I have a hard time of completely exiting anything. The other great tip, my favorite tip, is that I try to take my shoes off when I go inside, because if I don't, then I know that I'm still wrapped up in whatever. I'm still wrapped up in my to-do list if I've forgotten to take my shoes off. And so if I can feel my feet on the floor, that's just a signal to my brain and my body that I'm shifting into a different space.
That's good. My favorite thing to do when I get home is put on Christmas pajamas. Like when the pandemic hit, I was like, we're working in Christmas pajamas from now on. So even in July, I put on my Christmas pajamas. Mackenzie, what about you? How do you do wellness?
I think something that I've picked up more during, like, since the pandemic has started and I've had more time that I've spent at my house is like houseplants and gardening. And I think there's something about like having something living around me that like I'm taking care of, that is just a good hobby and like a good headspace to be in, and just makes me happy. So in the summer I had like a little apartment porch garden that I tried really hard with and got some tomatoes out of. So and now it's just to my house plants. But I also have been trying to do more of reading or watching TV, like strictly just for pleasure. So reading a book that doesn't have anything to do with what I've been doing for the day. And that's been helpful too.
Those are good. Molly?
Self-care. I just suck at it. Maybe being, I'm so bad. No. I think something that I've been really intentional about over the last 6 months is that part of my like trauma response or belief, or is this belief that's developed a long time ago, that I can't rely on anybody but myself. And that's not true. And that I have to be really aware of when I start to like shrivel back up into myself and stop asking for help, or stop telling other people what's going on. And so I think the biggest part of trying to promote resiliency for me is reaching out and asking for help and being honest with other people about what I'm going through. I think everyone who finds themselves in a helping profession, like we have those personal ties, like we have a reason like why we've gotten into the work. And I've had experiences where my like personal experience in life, even recently, like did not match up with my professional beliefs at all. And that kind of rocked me and I might be in the midst of an identity crisis, but being honest about that and working through it and trying to do my best to grow and being a person in recovery, like I know that anything that I put before my recovery that I'm going to lose, and that recovery tends to give us lives that take us away from our recovery, if that makes sense. Like getting your family back, getting the job, getting the house, all of those wonderful things that you've hoped and prayed for so long, they take up time and energy. And if I'm not focusing on my recovery and on myself and on my relationship with my higher power, I know I'm going to lose all of those things. So trying to keep my recovery at the forefront.
That's good. I can relate to having a hard time asking for help. It's one of the scariest things I think still in my life today. So listening to you talk, it's almost like I would like to practice asking for help once a day, because I've just now started doing it and I'm not comfortable with it yet. And I have said before, as we've been doing these, that I'm starting to hear from certain trainings and things that we operate under the if we need help, when we should operate under when we need help, because everyone needs help all the time, but it's just like not okay to need it. So that's something I'm practicing too. So I'm going to be thinking of a way. We all need buttons or something that but the button would be on us. So maybe a magnet or something that says, how can you ask for help today? So thank you for helping me think of that in a different way. Ashley, what about you? How do you do wellness?
I do wellness about half. No. So I consider this, and I've had a lot of gratitude, especially recently, for like my recovery and being involved in 12-step recovery, because from the very beginning, it was like pounded into my head, like you have to just stick to the basics no matter what. I'm currently in grad school, so thank goodness for the break. But I balance a lot of identities and a lot of roles, and I'm also a single mother of two, work full-time, school full-time, everything full-time. And Jerry Miller's my advisor, and Jerry and I were having a conversation recently about next semester and what that's going to look like. And she said, you've just got to like ask yourself, like, what are 3 things each week that I absolutely cannot survive without? Like, what 3 things do you have to have? And one of those things that I have to do like every single day or every single week is like go to some sort of 12-step meeting, whether that's on Zoom or in person. It's worked so far, and so I'm not going to quit doing what I know works. Time with my family, so being intentional about, we put our phones in another room at 9:30 every night. Like that's one boundary that we have. All of us do it. Like all of our electronics go in another room so that we have at least 30 minutes to an hour before bedtime to just enjoy each other. We have the same questions we ask every night at the dinner table, like what was the best part of your day, the worst part of your day, and what are you looking forward to? And so being super intentional about those things. And then exercise does more for my mental health than like anything else ever has. It just gives me an opportunity to kind of like set goals based on things that I told myself I never could do. And then reading for pleasure. Everybody told me that once I went to grad school, I was never going to want to read again. And I get so excited for breaks because throughout the semester, I'll come up with a list of books and I'll slowly start buying those. And then I literally have like 6 books to read between now and January.
That's cool. Somebody mentioned once that they put their books or the things that they want to buy themselves in their Amazon shopping cart. And then when they have time or money, then they go and pick something off the list, which I thought was a super cool way to do that. So we've got like a very few minutes, 5 or 6 minutes. People have been typing stuff in the chat. And when we're done, I'm going to copy and paste this in an email to y'all so you can see the comments. But if anybody has a comment or question that they have not put in the chat and would like to take time to ask that now, we can give you a few minutes to do that. So I like to be quiet for just a few seconds because it takes people a few seconds to find their mute button. So I'm going to wait and see if anybody has anything they'd like to say. So we'll keep an eye on the chat. Anything else that I haven't asked y'all about that you feel like is important to say, either about the center or trauma resilience or self-care, any of that, wellness, any of those things before I let you go, like something I haven't asked you about?
I think something that we talk about a lot across our programs, and it shows itself in the work that we do as well, is that we really believe that we need all voices at the table. And so so the sentencing circle tries to incorporate voices that aren't usually listened to. And we have a community coalition that we're kind of facilitating. That's the Watauga Community Justice Coalition that meets monthly. The next meeting is tomorrow morning. You can email me if anybody wants to be on the email list or join us. It's at 10:30. And so we're really trying to make sure that we have representatives from all these different fields. We work at the intersection of a lot of different fields. So we want to hear from law enforcement, and we want to hear from people with lived experience, and we want to hear from treatment providers and community members. And it's really important to hear, to listen, to understand what those people are telling us, rather than just pick and choose the things that we want to hear from them. And knowing that we're not going to agree on everything, because we all have different experiences, but that we can find the common ground to build programs that are collaborative and that accomplish what I think all our goals are, which is to help people change their lives that want to change their lives, to make our community safer, to improve the peace and prosperity of our community, and to give people opportunity, make sure everybody has an opportunity to achieve that. And so I'm really proud of the work that we do to maintain the relationships, across all these different fields, which sometimes are challenging, but I think it's really important, and that it's kind of infused into the work that we do.
And so there was a question about possible internships. So Marissa, do you mind to put an email in the chat for people who either might want to make a referral to one of these programs, or the person who had a question about an internship? I know you've done those before, but you probably have a whole process. And then one question that I'll kind of ask of everybody while Marissa's doing that, and that is there ever a point, this is in the chat, is there ever a point where you try somehow to encourage or give vision to users who seem stuck in their addictions, and how do you do that? Any thoughts about that question?
I think we do that every day. Let me try to read the question again. Encourage or give vision to people who seem stuck in their addiction. Yes. So Ashley and I, we're fortunate enough to have our own lived experience, and to be able to be on the other side of that. And that's you don't have to have personal experience to be an amazing advocate, clinician, person in the field, whatever it is. But Ashley and I are super lucky to have that, because we can, listen to these. A lot of times what happens, and when we see people start to open up to us, is when, we're just spending some time in the car with somebody and just having like a normal conversation, about some of the things that they've experienced, some of that, those thought processes about addiction and all the excuses that always go back to use, and like validating that you're not crazy. Ashley talked about this a little bit, but I vividly remember like going to treatment the first time and thinking someone was going to whisper me the secret on how to stay sober, or give me the magic recipe on how to make that happen. And surprise, there's not. But I went to a 12-step meeting and I realized for the first time that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't like, that my only path forward was not to kill myself, that there were other people who were just like me, who had made the same irrational choices while drinking, and who drinking or using drugs, and that they had a way out, and if these people could do it, then so could I. And just having those really candid, like open conversations about what does your addiction look like right now? Like, what is your story? What is your pain that you're carrying right now? And this is where I've carried that same pain and the steps that I took to try to jump out of it and to come out of it. And then if somebody's ready and willing to make that change, then we continue to hold their hand through that process. But I think from the beginning, it just has to be a lot of trust and rapport building. And that's why we don't talk down, we don't tell people they're making the worst mistakes of their life, all of those types of things, because that doesn't achieve anything except for alienating that person. And it's saying that I'm not an ally, that I'm not going to be here for you when you do need help. We don't condone all the behavior, obviously, but we walk through them every step of the way.
Well, what I know from personal and professional experience is people live in so much shame, regardless of whether they're an active addiction or whatever situation there is, that you don't have to shame them because they're already consumed with it. And so that's they have plenty of that already, I think. Ashley, did you want to say anything about that question?
Yeah, so I think that for me, like in my own experiences in addiction and for a lot of the people that we serve, I think it's important for folks to know that, like, by the time most of them are like in our offices, right? Like, they already know that what they're doing on some level is not working. And so telling somebody what they should do, like, oh, well, you should quit using, isn't helpful because they already know that, you know? And I think that Molly and I do a really good job of like leveraging our own experience as well as just giving hope and solutions. I never thought, like, if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be incredibly grateful for the fact that, like, I have a 4-page long criminal history and was an IV drug user and like social services had taken custody of my children. Like, if you had told me that in any way, shape, or form I was going to be grateful for those experiences, I would have probably laughed at you. But today I'm really grateful to have lived through all those things, and we're able to show people that, like, oh yeah, like, we're still, you know, we still think the same ways, but here are solutions to acting on those thoughts, you know. And I think that within everybody is the propensity for change. Like, sometimes that's like my most flawed thinking, but at the same time, if I give up that hope, I think I just give up on life itself.
Yeah. Well, we know from even research that brains can change and heal and grow. So that gives us all hope. So I'm going to have to let y'all go. Thanks so much for spending time with us. We really enjoyed hearing more from you. I'm going to copy and paste the chat for you and hope the rest of your day goes well. And it was good to be with you. Thanks for spending time with us. Bye, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of the day.